Okay, so this is the subject-specific talk on social studies, 6th to 12th grade, how to implement biblical foundations. We're going to use the backwards planning paradigm to where, first off, we've got the standards, the 6 standards that just say, hey, these are the overarching themes that should pervade your lesson plans all year long, enabling and equipping students to answer these major questions. And it focuses them on the patterns, which is best practice, versus 135 disconnected integrations. And so we're going through the standards, and then it's the teacher's, writer's responsibility to assess formative, summative into the unit, summative into the course, to really get them constantly going back to these major themes and be able to provide evidence to substantiate their base, and that will reflect the biblical worldview. And then so then you get to lesson plans, and that's what the PowerPoint really focuses on hints to make the connections. And the first thing you always do is just say, hey, I want to connect this lesson with yesterday's, and it'll connect to tomorrow's, and how do I take these standards into big questions, essential questions to frame this lesson. And so standards are very frameable with questions. The first standard, it's just key to any kind of social studies pedagogy, which is it's just move away from rote memorization, exhaustive dates, names, and events, and focus on the huge patterns and forces at work. And so those are going to be geographic, economic, political, cultural, religious, social. And you play these factors out, and it forces you to zoom out, see the situation, see the worldviews at play, and then from that, you don't focus on just the losers or just the winners. You get more of a holistic focus, and then it goes right in the second standard of you develop a linear view of history that's cause and effect. It's not cyclical as we saw in the pantheistic paradigm. It's going forward, and it's being pushed forward by God's sovereign hand. So you look at the French Revolution through those different forces, and you see where the Enlightenment's at play, and you see the hubris of Bonaparte and how he's the pinnacle of this earth that's a closed system. He can own it. He goes all the way into Russia, and he's kicked out by Russian winters. And then in the crux of the materialistic time and the Holocaust and World War II and the hubris of Hitler and the ideal race, and he's conquering and he's going into Russia, and then the Russian winters also kick him out. And you begin to really notice these patterns. You make generational and connections throughout history, and that's where students really develop their frameworks and can substantiate it versus dates and names and events. And then you go into the second standard, which is on primary sources. Training students, just don't take a third party's word for it. You go and get the information. You do the hard work of reading through the material, and then how to pull out the purpose, how to pull out the conflict, how to identify the forces impending, and what's the worldview, and how is that spelled out, and how does that compare, how does it contrast to the biblical worldview. And then we also put in there that this concept of civics, and what is the role of the individual in society, in the forming of our nation. There's so much emphasis on virtue, the pursuit of the public good over the individual good. And in a postmodern society so focused on the individual, what is the role? But to debate that, and to even put out there opportunities for students to get involved civically. In fact, research says that students who participate in campaigns are much more likely to be involved long-term in the political process, voting, voicing the rights, and participating in campaigns. And so what does social studies look like lived out according to a biblical framework? We also have in the standards is suffering, because suffering is so pervasive throughout history, and how do various worldviews, as the prevalent worldview and the time you're studying, how does it compare to the biblical worldview, and where's the church in that suffering? Definitely when it's opportunity to discuss persecution, and then draw out of that the growth of the church, but also the beautiful stories of saints and heroes. And there's some examples there in the PowerPoint. And then ultimately, and this is the one I wanted to camp out on, is in social studies, so much of the secular curriculum comes out of a secular, humanistic point of view that we've already talked about, that says as the world has moved away from religion towards rational thinking, reason based on empirical evidence, we see all this explosion of knowledge. We've gone from, in one generation, my grandparents' generation, from horse and buggy to space exploration, and we now have we've been on the moon. We have rovers in Mars. We have the Hubble telescope sending back fabulous photos, and so from a biblical worldview compared to secular humanistic worldview, what are the factors at play there, especially in the founding of the United States, but of so many countries during the Enlightenment period, and those formed by England versus those formed by Spanish and Portugal, and the Catholic influence, the Protestant influence, and then what parts of our nation's forming did have a humanistic bent, what part had a biblical bent, the role of education, the role of public education. So all those factors constantly play out. And this is the secular humanistic point of view. This is the biblical point of view. When we say dark ages, were they really dark ages? Or were there a lot of abuses in those ages, just like other times? But there's also a lot of advancement in that age that led right into the production of the printing press, that led to an explosion of knowledge. So just constantly, what is language that is derivative from the secular humanistic point of view, and what is a biblical point of view coming from that? And then to always look for chances to just illustrate this is God's sovereign hand. One example I give you in the PowerPoint is, I remember at one point just saying, wow, God really chose the right time to send Jesus to the earth. Hellenization had taken place, or there's a common language that can extend throughout the known world of India in the east all the way to Spain and the English Isles in the west, and so you've got this chance to common culture, common language, great time for Jesus to come. Then I realized God didn't have to choose and react. God's sovereign hand planned everything up until that point and afterwards. So it's just an awesome chance to use social studies to show where God's work has been throughout history, and to break it apart into the components that we talked about in the first standard, so students have the tools to analyze worldviews and compare it to the biblical framework.